Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt Podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and hosting with me is Chris. What's up, Chris?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Zach. Always great to be here again. Welcome, everyone from the world and the interwebs. Thank you for joining us on our awesome podcast. And this will be wonderful to talk through. Great to see you again, my great friend.
Yeah, great to see
Yeah.
you too. Looking forward to it. So if you have been following us from the very beginning, or even if you're new, what we have done is each season of our podcast, we have gone through and reviewed a Star Trek series, just a very broad overview, and talked about some of our favorite episodes from the seasons. With season one of our podcast, we started with the original series. Then each season of the podcast, we reviewed a different legacy Star Trek show in order. And we have reached the final legacy show in Star Trek that at least what people would consider, and that's Star Trek Enterprise. So we are here to talk about the series as a whole and the first couple of seasons as far as our favorite episodes go. So if this is your first time watching us, thank you for joining us. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram and our YouTube channel, unless you're already here. We appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe, like, follow, whatever the buttons are to keep up with the latest and greatest that comes out of our podcast. But yeah, Chris, so we are talking about Star Trek Enterprise, a show that we're obviously very familiar with, that the majority of people watching and listening to this will probably be familiar with, although we'll meet the crew and we'll do some basic stuff about the show in case you've never watched it and maybe it fascinates you and now you want to go watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Enterprise, as you know, Zach, like I watched it recently, I would say, within over the last year, because I hadn't
Yeah.
seen the show in entirety. But then I went back and then got to start from the beginning and watch the entire show complete from beginning to end. And, was really grateful that it was all there on streaming and that I could see it and have everything in sequence and get to learn and love the show and become a part of it. So I was really, really glad I got to do that within the last year. So that was excellent.
Yeah. And we're going to say the same thing over and over again, probably throughout this episode of the podcast and the next one, because this is our part one look. Part two, we'll look at seasons 3 and 4 as we wrap it up. Since unfortunately it only had 4 seasons, we only doing a 2-parter here. Unlike previous shows that we reviewed, because of all the seasons, we want to make sure we hit each season. But this show has always been, even from the very beginning, woefully underrated. I think that it doesn't get enough love. I think it's gotten more love over time, but in general, I still think it's maybe not as highly rated of a Star Trek series as you would get like TNG or DS9 or Voyager or something like that.
Yeah, it came out at a very interesting or maybe awkward time, right?
Yeah.
In network television. I remember it came out on UPN, the United Paramount Network,
Yep.
which was kind of a at the time it was like a new network that had come out, right?
Yep.
And then um, this was one of the shows premiering on that new network, and certainly it wasn't on some of those main big networks that people were familiar with, like NBC and ABC. So a little bit of a startup network this had, and this being a premiere show for that network. So I always felt maybe that was, always that's a little bit awkward or maybe a bit of a challenge to secure an audience when you've got a new startup network like that. So
Yeah. Especially back then, right? I
yeah.
mean, TV Enterprise, I think, suffered, unfortunately, from just bad timing, right? Because you had a new network created by Paramount, right? It was their own station channel. And I know Dominic and Connor have mentioned several times on Shuttlepod Show that the Enterprise was supposed to be like the flagship show of that new network station that Paramount had created. And so I believe Voyager also had migrated over there at some point or had done reruns on there. I don't remember exactly which, because I don't remember if Voyager. I thought Voyager also was fully on UPN. But I don't remember off the top of my head if it started on a network station and moved over. I don't remember. If one of you watching or listening, you can help us out, let us know. But it suffered, I think, from bad timing. And by that, what I mean is there's a lot of people that thought that when Enterprise came along, the franchise was kind of at the point where people were a little bit, I'm not say exhausted, but they were kind of, worn out a little bit of Star Trek, because they'd had Star Trek on pretty much every year since the original series, right? Because you had it premiere, and then you had it go into reruns, and then there was like that little gap, right? But it was on TV somewhere. Then you had the movies, then you had Next Gen, you had DS9, Voyager. So it was this long decades and decades of Star Trek. And it's almost like the franchise suffered from a little fatigue. And I think people just kind of, didn't really latch on to the show in the beginning like maybe other Star Trek series had.
Yeah, those are great points. It's almost like there was a little bit of saturation of Star Trek, right? Because you're right, DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise at the same time. But it's interesting when you think about then the level that people thought of what a saturation point was, because now with streaming you've got all of these different streaming networks plus a whole lot of shows on the streaming services, whether it's, well, like we talk about Marvel and we talk about Star Wars all the time, but man, there's just a whole lot of shows at the same time there. So
and you're talking, you were
Yeah.
talking like TNG, DS9, and Voyager were all 7 seasons. That's a lot of episodes. And, if you're a fan back then and you're on it every week, you eventually get like, okay, there's so many episodes to watch. And by the time you get to Enterprise, you're like,
And, and it's not like the idea of Enterprise was awesome. And it's not like, but just a really interesting time, awkward period with the network and with the audience. Who knows? I mean, if it was to come on like today, I think it would just be a completely different kind of experience if it came on today. Yeah.
Especially now, because most shows are getting 8 to 10 episodes, maybe 12 a season, and that's it. And you have this idea where you can stream it anywhere on your phone, and you're not having to be in front of your TV at a certain time or have your VCR. Back in the day, kids, you had to have these big tapes called VHS tapes where you had to tape things. Even when DVR first came around. Another thing I remember Dominic and Connor mentioning was like Enterprise came around the time that DVR first started, right? So you're getting away from the VHS recordings, you're getting into having something that you can record and come back and watch it later. And apparently back then, the ratings were not as good as I think Paramount hoped for. But the reason why maybe they weren't as good is because people had DVR, and they were not counting the DVR recordings as part of the ratings. So if you had, let's say 2 million people, for example, just a random number, right? 2 million people tune in to watch an episode that week.
Yeah.
But then you had another 5 or 6 million people that had set it to record in their DVR. Paramount didn't count those numbers as viewership or however the terminology works. So I think that in and of itself was bad, because DVR really became the beginnings of what we have today, right? The idea of recording something, or this idea of being able to just watch it whenever because it's out there and available. So I think that was a foul on the network for doing it that way.
That is an important nuance. I didn't think about that at all.
Yeah.
Very important.
So we talked about this in the past, and we did want to get Dominic and Connor on at the time we were going to talk about Enterprise. And so we kind of, we're going to get there in season 5. And then the strike happened. So, having conversations with them, we'll work on getting them on with us after the strike's over, when they can actually come on and talk about their careers, and talk about like what we always like to do, Chris, right? Which is start at the beginning and work our way through people's lives and careers until they get to that point where they were on Star Trek or whatever thing that they're most well known for.
Yeah, absolutely. When we get to that point, that'll be amazing. Of course, that will be amazing.
Yeah. Dominic and Connor are great dudes, and we look forward to hopefully getting some time to sit down with them and talk through their careers with them and their roles on Star Trek, and also a Shuttle Pod show, right? That's been a big part of their lives now too. So
yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into this. So I briefly mentioned this a little while ago, Chris, but I think the majority of Trek fans will agree that Star Trek Enterprise, or originally just titled Enterprise when it first started, is the last of what people have referred to now colloquially as Legacy Trek. There's Legacy Trek and then New Trek, and New Trek started with Discovery, right? And we got Discovery, Strange New Worlds. If you want to count the JJ movies in there, maybe, but I'm not counting those. At least not in canon.
But that Legacy Trek has a And granted, each series definitely has its own flavor for sure, but the Legacy Trek as a whole, maybe not including the original series, but from TNG on, it has a certain feel, right? Because it's got some continuous feeling in there. You feel like, yeah, you could kind of see it in the same holistic pattern as TNG or DS9 or Voyager, kind of got the same feeling, how it's how the episodes go, how they're shot, the effects, all of that, how they're written. I always felt, at least to me, could see that. Yeah, I could see that as
Yeah.
part of the Legacy Trek family.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, Rick Berman's still in charge of overseeing Star Trek right at the time. And under that umbrella of his control. So Enterprise was the 6th series set in the Star Trek universe. It was created by Rick Berman and Brandon Braga, and of course, based on Gene Roddenberry's original Star Trek. Now, I do remember watching a documentary, and if you have not seen it out there, and you were watching or listening to us, I highly recommend you go and check out William Shatner's The Captains documentary. It's really fantastic. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. William Shatner goes around and he interviews the captains on Star Trek, including Chris Pine, who at the time the documentary was shot was the newest, most recent captain to join the franchise. Well, one of the individual, and by the way, you can go watch it on YouTube with ads for free. Just go search for the captains documentary, and it will come up and you can watch it. You have to deal with the ads, but you can watch the whole thing for free. I have the documentary along with a couple others on Blu-ray, and I like to watch it once in a while. It's really good. But one of the interviews in there, of course, is Scott Bakula, right? Who played Captain Archer. And Scott Bakula specifically did not want to do Star Trek until they told him that, oh, you're going to be the captain of the Enterprise, but you're going to be the first captain, meaning prequel to Spock and Kirk. And that's when he said, okay, yep, I'm fully on board with that. Because he didn't want to try and, live in the shadow of Captain Kirk's shoes, right? If he came after Kirk, he, going back and being part of a prequel where you come before Kirk, now you have this whole, new palette, this whole new easel that you can create from. And there's nothing before that.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that fact from Scott Bakula. So that makes sense.
So go on YouTube, Chris, and watch the documentary. It's really good. You get really good insight into all the captains: Avery Brooks, Patrick Stewart, Scott Bakula, Kate Mulgrew, and Chris Pine, all on there. And it's really fascinating to hear the questions and the things that Shatner asks them, what they talk about, and then, Star Trek and everything. It's really a wonderful documentary.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. So, this, of course, if you're a Trek fan, this show is a prequel to the original series. And this is following mankind's first attempt to travel out into deep space. Its first Warp 5 capable starship. And it ran from 2001 to 2005 on, like you had said before, Chris, the United Paramount Network, UPN, and replaced Star Trek Voyager. It was supposed to be the premier flagship show. I don't remember what else ran on that network. Do you remember any other shows that were on there?
I want to say Buffy. I want to say Buffy.
I was gonna say I think Buffy might have been on there, either in reruns. I don't know if they were new episodes at the time, but at least in reruns.
I think so. And I think it was that one. And I'm a huge Buffy fan. Yeah. So
I remember watching episodes on UPN back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now it's maybe transformed to Paramount Plus, I suppose.
Right.
Right.
Well, and Paramount has an actual channel on, if you go on DirecTV and stuff like that, there's an actual Paramount channel. That's where all the Yellowstone episodes run. All those Yellowstone shows all run on Paramount.
Right.
And they run some Star Trek stuff on there as well, obviously. But they run on there. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting, Chris, that Enterprise is the one show in Legacy Trek that was not affected by the JJ verse. Right? Because
because it's pre Kirk.
Exactly. Yep. So if you consider those movies canon, which I don't, but if you do, then the events that happen in this series are not affected because that takes place in Kirk and Spock's time.
Yeah. I don't consider those JJ verse movies canon either. Yeah.
It's just like the new Star Wars trilogy stuff
That's
we don't
right.
talk about, right?
That's right. But we should talk about those at some point because we're both strongly opinionated about the JJ verse Star Trek movies.
We
Yeah.
could. I mean, if you want to see me, get so mad and irritated that I bust a blood vessel in my forehead and I pass out, then sure, let's do
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So we go back in time with Enterprise before Kirk and Spock. We're in the 22nd century at the time that the Federation and what they called the United Earth was just becoming, players basically in the quadrant, right, in space as they go out. Now, I did find this interesting when I was looking up some info about Enterprise, just to see if I could find some GWiz facts and stuff that I hadn't heard before. I didn't know this part. Apparently, Rick Berman, this is from Memory Alpha, Rick Berman's his original idea for Enterprise was to have the whole first season set on Earth as they're building the Warp 5 ship, as they're building the NX-01 Enterprise. Unfortunately, because it would be, I guess, just too far different from the rest of the franchise, it was redrafted. But you do see some of that in the pilot episode.
Yeah.
Right. You see some flashbacks to Zefram Cochrane giving a speech in front of the NX-01 Enterprise prior to it being, taken out and tested and all that stuff. So I thought that was really interesting.
That would have been like a neat one-off mini couple episode movies, right?
Yeah, even like the first like 3 or 4 episodes would have been cool to do it that way.
Yeah, before the launch of the NX-01, and to see that, to see that the final construction of the NX-01 and launch out would have been really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, well, let's jump into this. Chris, and let's meet some notable producers, writers, and let's meet the crew.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we have Rick Berman. That was a huge part of the creative team, and Brandon Braga and Manny Coto, who's a writer. And you're right. I believe that I had seen that Manny Coto, he was a writer and showrunner for season 4, and it was this year, I believe, that he recently passed away a few months ago. So I appreciate all his contributions to the show and Star Trek family.
Yeah, Dominic and Connor mentioned that he was a really, really good dude, and he was such a good writer, and because he took over as a showrunner of season 4, many people argue season 4 was the best season of Enterprise.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time arguing with that. I really do. I think that season 4 really was spectacular.
Yeah. And it makes sense. You have a few seasons to get your identity going, get your traction into who the characters are and the dynamics, and moving forward. Totally makes sense that season 4 is the best season from there. Yeah. So we've got those fantastic producers and writers and creators, and then meeting the crew, starting with the captain, Scott Bakula, who you said before. And it's really interesting, the background of Captain Jonathan Archer, because his father is a prominent figure as well. Because I believe, if I don't get it wrong, his father is the creator of the engine.
Yep.
And I love in the, I believe it's the pilot episode, but you get some flashbacks of Captain Archer as a boy, flying the model aircraft that he's got. So I thought that was great. I think you hit it right on, where Captain Archer as a captain, he doesn't have to. He's not in the shadow of Kirk or any of the other captains, right? He's his own kind of identifiable captain. And what I like about, I want to hear your thoughts on this. What I like about Captain Archer is when you think about all the pressure he's under, and it's complete, I think, in a scale higher than all of the pressure that the other captains were under, right? So Federation doesn't exist now. He's captain of the first, essentially, Earth exploring spaceship, and they're all watching him to see, hey, how does humanity do? And he's getting a lot of flack from the Vulcans too, because they're thinking, oh, you guys are too immature. So tremendous amount of pressure. But I think the creators like Rick Berman, Brandon, and they just set up this great kind of circumstance and idea. Like, yeah, here's this crew, here's this captain, completely different pressure because you've got human ambition, but you've got everyone that has been saying to humanity, at least the Vulcans saying, hey, you guys aren't ready for this yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
I think when we talked about this, when we talked about Voyager, right, with
Yeah.
Janeway, that Janeway and that crew were under such immense pressure because they're in an area of space that was unexplored. They didn't know, they were so far from everyone. They had no help. They had to rely on each other to survive. And Janeway in particular, she had to do everything in her power to get her crew home, right, safely,
Mhm.
as best she could. And she also had to adopt and change her philosophies and her leadership style and everything that she held dear as a Starfleet captain, because of where she was, right? And she had to be more flexible. I mean, you have Captain Archer, who is part of this ship, does not have nearly the level of technology that Voyager does, but also on top of that, doesn't know what's going on. There's not the same rules and regulations that Janeway had, and it's very much. I look at Enterprise like very much the Wild West, even more than Voyager, right? Because they don't have the same amount of technology. They got the Vulcans breathing down their neck, and they're going out into space where humanity has not really explored before. So immense pressure. I think there's a really good point you made. Immense pressure by Archer to keep people alive, keep his ship together, prove the Vulcans wrong, prove the humans that are in charge of Starfleet and stuff, prove them right that it was time for humanity to go out on its own. A lot of stuff. I mean, and honestly, I mean, can you think of anybody better than the son of the guy who creates the Warp 5 ship? No.
I know. It's such a cool idea for a captain. He is like this, I feel, this frontier explorer, right?
Yeah, he's a frontiersman.
He's a frontiersman. And you think about the explorers, I think I want to get their names right. Lewis and Clark, I think, that did the exploring there. And he doesn't have all these institutional rules that Picard or Kirk or all of the other captains had when the Federation was there. He was just this frontiersman representative of humanity, like pure, like, hey, he represented our aspiration. We want to explore, we want to go further. So it's such a cool idea. I love it.
And what I love too is the timing, right? This show is not that far in the future from where we're at now, right? I mean, you're talking about 130-ish years in the future from where we're at right now, a little over 130 years, right? You're talking 2150s. So little over 130 years. I think with the way they designed the ship, and Doug Drexler had a big part in the design of the NX-01. We've talked with him about that before, right? And the way they design even the uniforms to look like these flight suits, which are pretty similar to what we have these days as well. Everything really spoke to the idea that we're not that far off. And oh, by the way, Enterprise is not that far off from the first time the Vulcans landed. I mean, you're talking about 100 years ish, right? Maybe a little less than 100 years from when the Vulcans land. And now they're out exploring. I guess, no, it's a little over 100 years, right? I'm trying to do math on the fly here, and it's not a good thing.
All good.
They land in 2047, I think it was. And then Enterprise, this is in the 2150s, so a little over 100 years, I guess. But it's not that far removed from that. It's not that far removed from Zefram Cochrane, right?
Right.
So I love that this show does a good job of filling this time period in that we know of from First Contact, right? When the Vulcans land and Zefram Cochrane meets them and all that, to, a period of time prior to Kirk.
Yep. Very, very cool. Our doctor, Dr. Phlox, played by John Billingsley, is terrific. What a great personality he's got.
I love Phlox.
I know.
Love him.
I know. A Denubulan, but he's just got all kinds of I mean, he's on Frontiers Medicine too, right? He's on this exchange. And so he's got all of his specimen kind of samples that he's got with him on the ship. So it's great. It's great that they've got I thought it was a great ad to have a Denobulan alien doctor on there, like helping out the crew. And throughout Enterprise, we get to learn all about his culture, which is great. Just set up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole new species, right?
Mhm.
But we never heard of Denobulans prior to this.
Yeah. Yeah. We also have another Vulcan first officer, sub commander, T'Pol, played by Jolene Blaylock. So that was cool. I thought she was a great addition.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that humanity is going to go out and the Vulcans don't want it to happen. And they're like, okay, well, you need to take one of us along with you. And they put on this really rigid, just completely true typical Vulcan into Paul, right? And of course, as the show goes on, she changes. The more she's around humans, the more she kind of relaxes a little bit, the more she begins to see things through from their point of view, which I think is great the way they wrote that in. And her character evolves and changes. But yeah, I it's interesting because the Vulcans wanted basically a spy. They wanted someone of theirs to spy on the humans, make sure that they're not getting into too much trouble, and when they do mess up, to make sure that they know about it, because just one more reason they can point to, well, see, look at all these things you messed up. That's why we know you're not ready.
Yeah. And there were good exchanges between Archer and T'Pol, kind of recognizing that fact, right?
Especially in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Archer calling that out, because he definitely has to feel, and the crew, he's got to recognize that the crew's got a sense of, it might not be overt, but there's certainly some resentment there, right? Because humanity's made progress. It wants to keep continuing, and you don't want someone's being condescending to you. So
right. Yeah. Well, on top of that, did you notice this? And maybe this is just me, but I don't think, especially in the beginning of the show, we're talking about the first couple seasons here in this part one of our look at Enterprise, Archer really wasn't a very good diplomat. And by that, I mean, if there were certain things that had to be done or certain cultures they would meet that would get offended by certain things they would do, he would kind of fly off the rails a little bit and be like, this is stupid. Why are we just, he didn't want to deal with all the fluffy pomp and circumstance. And he just wanted to go explore. He didn't feel like he needed to walk on eggshells every time he met somebody new. And every time there'd be some new species that didn't like what they were doing, you could tell he'd be like, he'd just get kind of frustrated. So I wouldn't consider, if we're looking at, and I know we've talked about doing this before sometime, about doing a comparison of all the captains, like the legacy captains, right? I don't think I would consider Archer that great, at least in the beginning of the show, a very good diplomat.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, was he a test pilot?
He was, he was, because he was part of the early NX project. And there's an episode about that we'll talk about in a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. So that's more of his knowledge and skill base, right? He's coming from, hey, he's got all this great technical background, flight background, test pilot background, experimental background, not having as much time in his life, let's say Picard would have, about studying all this philosophy and diplomacy. Yeah.
That's actually a good point. That's a good point. And not only that too, but we see from the very first episode the fact that Archer cannot stand the smug, the smugness and everything of the Vulcans. I mean, him and Ambassador Saval do not get along in the beginning.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, but see it from his eyes, right? He thinks that, like you said in the beginning, right, that Vulcans look at humanity as too immature, they're not ready. And he's like, we've had 100 years since you guys came here. Eventually we have to be ready. And you guys are just going to keep telling us we're not ready. We're not ready. You're never going to think we're ready. We need to go and stretch our legs and make this happen. We're ready. We need to go.
And that brings this kind of idea and this theme that you're always you're ready, right? There's some people in our lives that might say you're never ready, and even ourselves, we might internalize we're never ready to make the next stretch goal, right? But you're always ready, whether you're as prepared or not. You're always ready. So I like that theme through the series.
That's a really good point. I like how you put that. You said we're always ready, but there's a difference between being ready and then being prepared.
Yeah.
So I think that's good. I really like that, Chris. So I think humanity was ready, but maybe they weren't prepared. And we see that in very early on in season 1. There's a couple of times, right, where they're like, oh, we got to turn the ship around and go back. Or, the Vulcans want us to return back, or, so-and-so wants us to come back. And there was one episode in particular where Archer actually orders them to start heading back home because they've been attacked by this ship that's just decimating them.
Mm-hmm.
And he realizes, we just don't have the weaponry. We just don't have the technology yet to keep going. And then of course things change and they go back out. But you see some doubt creep in as well after certain encounters they have.
Yeah. But they keep failing forward. Right. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Like I said, I really like how you put that. They're ready to go out. They're ready to stretch their legs, but they may not be prepared like they should be.
Yeah.
So that's good. I like that.
They just don't know.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that's the thing though. The Vulcans know. The Vulcans, there's many episodes, right, where they run into something and the Vulcans have already encountered this species or they know this area. But the Vulcans are so stubborn. They do not want to share stuff with them because they want to see humanity fail so that humanity will go back to Earth and just kind of stay in their little corner, and then they won't want to venture out. And it's the Vulcans are not in this period of time. They're not the same kind of Vulcans we know in Spock's time or in TNG's time, where they don't look at humanity as if they are, basically cavemen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they don't look at them in the same way. Yes, Vulcans are always going to have that, Vulcanness to them, but Vulcans in this time period just really find every excuse they can to kind of stomp humanity down and kind of keep them, I don't want to say humble, but keep them kind of, in a place where they're not prepared. They're not ready.
Yeah. Those Vulcans. Absolutely. As Lieutenant Malcolm Reed, we have our friend Dominic Keating is there. I thought he played that part brilliantly. I think he was
absolutely.
Yeah. His background was from the UK, I think. The lieutenant's background. Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
So that was great. And we've got Anthony Montgomery playing our helmsman, Travis Mayweather. So he did a great job piloting the ship. I think he was the solo pilot. We didn't have the two kind of navigator and pilot at the same time. It was just Mayweather being there.
Yeah.
And Linda Park did a great job as playing Hoshi Sato, our communications officer.
Yeah, we find out she is the inventor and the creator of the Universal Translator.
Yeah.
Because that's right. Things like that are cool, right? Because in the original series and TNG, all these other shows, they have this thing called the Universal Translator. Where did it come from? Who created it? How did it get there? Well, we learned that. We learned that in the first season of Enterprise, that she has to come up with some type of universal translator as they're meeting all these species and trying to quickly interpret and translate what that alien race is saying, so they know whether or not they're just saying hello or saying we're going to blow you up, right? So I think that was wonderful that they put that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. She knew like several different languages, several different dialects, and that was her specialty. So that was great. Having that dimension in the Enterprise series was great, and what a lot of pressure like Hoshi would have had on her. I think we had a couple episodes where Hoshi was like had tremendous self-doubt, like, hey, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Didn't
it remind you a little Cadet Uhura in the first season of Strange New Worlds reminded me a little bit of Hoshi. Right? This idea of self-doubt that I don't think I can do this and I'm not ready and everything. And Hoshi was the same way. If you look at Broken Bow, which is the pilot episode, Archer had to push really hard to recruit her and get her to come out on Enterprise. She had a teaching job. I think it was in Brazil somewhere.
Yeah.
Teaching language and all that stuff. And she liked where she was at. And Archer knew she was one of the best, and he had to have her on the ship, and he had to push hard to get her there.
Yep, absolutely. We have our friend Connor Trenier as Charles Tucker III. Yeah, he had great episodes, man.
He did. And oh, be careful not to tell this to Connor. I don't want him to.
There
But Trip is my favorite character from the series.
you go.
Yeah, Trip's my favorite character. I just
The-
he has this he just has this kind of a little bit of innocence to him, right? Because he hasn't been out there. Obviously, he's an unbelievably good engineer,
Yeah,
and he cares about the people of his crew, of the crew. He's the guy that gets put in charge when Archer and T'Pol aren't around, and even sometimes when T'Pol is around, he gets put in charge to sit in the chair. In fact, there was one episode in particular where he pretends he's the captain, he's Captain Archer instead of himself to some alien who was asking for him, or somebody. No, it was a Vulcan. It was a Vulcan from a Vulcan ship asking for Archer, but they didn't know what he looked like, and so he played the part of Archer, which I thought was really funny.
yeah. He had a lot of funny like moments in the series. I thought was great.
Really, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so we have a really good first crew. First crew of the first human Warp 5 vessel. It's not the first humans that have gone into deep space. We know that because we learned that slowly over time through Ensign Mayweather's background. We learned that he was a space boomer or a boomer, and those
Yeah.
are people in Enterprise. It was a slang that was used for people who have been born in space and spend most of their lives there. And his parents were his whole family was part of like this cargo ship that would make these long deep travels, and they'd be sometimes traveling for months and months and months and years, going to and from bringing things there. But these cargo ships were only flying typically around warp 1, I think, maybe
Yeah.
warp 2 at most, so it would take them a long time to get from to and from places.
Yeah, so that was cool, kind of introducing that idea and maybe that subculture, right, into the series, right? Because
Yeah,
we
it
do,
was a subculture.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because later on in the series, we do get to visit some of those cargo ships, and you get to meet some of those captains, and you get the idea of the kind of feeling and the animosity that's between them. You know?
Yeah, especially the one episode where I believe Mayweather's on board the ship, right? And they keep
Mhm.
getting attacked by Nausicaans.
Yeah,
And the idea that they've taken a Nausicaan hostage, and Mayweather's not a big fan of that. And he has certain values and principles, and this one guy is tried to fill in as acting captain while the real captain's been injured and all
yeah,
this
that's
stuff. And
right.
so you get some of that insight. I'm glad you brought that up. Definitely as a subculture for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Because they've got resentment towards the Enterprise and the NX-01. You know, like, hey,
Yeah.
we've been out here making these cargo runs for however long and
Decades and decades and decades. Yeah.
decades. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
But we do have quite a few recurring characters in this series. I think, show like for example, we've talked about this before. DS9 is widely known for its massive recurring character or guest star characters,
Mhm.
and the quote unquote deep bench that Ira Stephen Bear always talked about, with being able to bring all these amazing actors playing these amazing characters in. Well, Enterprise had a lot of really cool and good recurring characters as well, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it did. Me too. We have Admiral Forrest, who is I think that is the immediate supervisor for Captain Archer.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was great because he's always in this. I used the word awkward before, but he's always in this awkward position, right? Because he's got the Vulcans like on one side, and then he's got United Space Force. I'm trying to remember that.
Oh, United Earth.
United Earth, like on the other side. He's got this constant like balancing act. Man,
Well, he's got really three, right? One on each
yeah,
side, and he's got Archer,
he's got Archer.
right? So he's surrounded with many differing opinions and viewpoints, right?
Yeah, but I thought he provided great support. So considering the circumstances, great support to Archer. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I think more times than not, he went to bat for Archer like a
Yeah.
good supervisor would, right? Somebody he knows that Archer's out there, he's in the thick of it, he's seeing things, he's doing things, and he knows that Archer's the one that really has a good handle on what's going on, and he's got to try to support that even against the Vulcans who are constantly clamoring for Enterprise to come back. Oh, they're not ready to see, they messed up, or they did this, they did that. So
Yep. Absolutely. Commander Shran. who made several appearances in there, our Andorian friend, Commander Shran.
Yeah.
He was awesome.
Yeah, Jeffrey Combs, who has, and Vaughn Armstrong, by the way, these two actors have probably played the most characters in Star Trek. In fact, I think there's been some debate about it, but I'm pretty sure, and they talked about this at the Shuttlepod Show's live event we went to, Chris, in LA.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they mentioned, so Vaughn Armstrong, I think, holds the record for most characters played, even though everybody thinks it's Jeffrey Combs.
Oh, okay.
So both of these guys have been cast so many times as many different characters in several different Star Trek series. In fact, Vaughn, I think, has been on every series dating back from TNG through Enterprise. And Jeffrey Combs, I don't know if Jeffrey Combs was in TNG, but he was definitely obviously on DS9.
Yeah.
He was on Voyager, on Enterprise. So both these guys have played a lot of characters. And Commander Shran, I'm a big fan of Shran. I like him. He kind of coins the term pink skins, right? Yeah. For the humans, because they're not blue skin like the Andorians are.
And they both make a great musical duo.
They do. That's true.
They do.
Good point.
Yeah. Major Hayes, one of our MACOs. I can't remember the acronym for MACO.
MACO stands for Military Assault Command Operations.
Oh, there we go.
It's a very like unique and different thing that we don't see really in Star Trek. Like, well, we've seen it now in Strange New Worlds, but you don't really see like much of like special forces or some type of like combat type of unit specifically designed for that. And MACO is kind of like the Starfleet's version of like the Marines, right? Like they go in, they're specialized, they do certain things, certain tasks. I thought a very unique subset of characters to be added onto Enterprise.
Yeah, it was. I mean, they had different uniforms.
Yep.
They didn't have the same specialties as the rest of the crew, right? They weren't they couldn't fly the ship. They were just
they're not explorers.
They're not explorers. You're right. They were just completely special ops kind of people there.
Yeah.
And I think they come into prevalence like I want to say when they go into the Expanse, but or the Xindi War, but I'm trying to remember when they really started coming on, but it was one of those.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. That was somewhere in that range. I'm trying to look up, but yeah, like you learn about their training and stuff. In there's an episode called the Xindi that they're in, which was season 3, the first episode of season 3. So you're probably right. Probably the end of season 2, season 3. I know they're definitely heavily in season 3. So,
yep. We have Silik, who is Suliban. Yeah. So he's one of the antagonists, one of the bad guys. I always thought he was. The Suliban were pretty great. They were kind of creepy. I thought, but
really unique.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot. I mean, Star Trek's had a lot of unique aliens and species that they've brought into the series, but the Suliban might be one of the most unique, I think, just because remember they're genetically created, right? Are they? There's some level of genetic manipulation that goes on that gives them the ability to do the things they can do, like camouflaging and being able to like discombobulate themselves and slide under doors and all this like really crazy stuff that they can do.
I believe they could crawl on the ceilings too and crawl around. That was they had definitely unique abilities. Ambassador Saval, our smug Vulcan ambassador on Earth, I think most of his time was spent on Earth, I believe. So that was always there, and he was he would communicate to Admiral Forrest and to T'Pol a great deal of the time. So he got a little bit better. I think improved his personality, improved throughout the seasons, but he always had that smugness.
Yeah, I think him and Archer eventually started to come to an understanding. They started to, and I think they started to form, as much as you can with a Vulcan, a level of friendship once Soval realized that, okay, I have to kind of side here. That Archer kind of, he's handling things. He kind of knows what's going on and what he's doing, and but that doesn't happen until much, pretty late in the show.
Yeah, I agree with that. we've got Daniels. He's a time traveler and part of the Temporal Cold Wars, which was Temporal Cold Wars, kind of a story arc of the show. He wasn't in it a lot, but I don't know about you, but I could never tell. Or at the beginning when Daniels popped up, I was like, is he a good guy? Is he on Archer's side, or is he just playing Archer, or what's up with Daniels? So a little bit of
Yeah, he's
ambiguity there for him.
yeah, he's very coy. He's very he tries to keep things, pretty vanilla and plain. He doesn't want you to really know what's going on and what he's
Mhm.
doing. He's sneaky in the sense that he doesn't really want to, like you said, Archer to know what exactly is going on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust him with much of anything, to be honest with you, if I was in Archer's position.
Yeah. I know.
He kind of seems sleazy at times a little bit, right? Like real,
Yeah.
just like he'll tell you one thing, but you're not really sure if he's telling that to you. Meanwhile, he's stabbing you in the back on the other side. So yeah,
Yeah. I felt the same way. We had Brent Spiner visit us in the series, and he was Dr. Soong.
yeah,
So yeah,
another variation of
I
Sue.
know. I like this one. He was in. I think this variation of Dr. Soong. Was this the one where he was in a prison, in some sort of
Yeah,
prison? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because he had his augments, right?
Yeah.
He was
Yeah,
doing
that's right.
stuff that they frowned upon.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We've got Klingons that made some appearances in the show that actually looked like what Klingons should look like.
Yeah,
Good. And I think maybe our probably yours and my favorite recurring side character would be Porthos.
yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think. If of all the other Star Trek series, I don't think any captains had a pet on board.
Right.
At least not to the level with Porthos. And I love Porthos. He's a little beagle, right? Love Porthos. I think he's super cute. He's a great little companion for Archer. Archer's not married, doesn't have girlfriend, which most of the captains don't,
Mhm.
right? Um, but he's a great little companion, and he adds a wonderful little fun element other than the one episode which we'll talk about where he's in sick bay. But besides that, I mean, he's a dog, right? So he's Archer's best buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a great add to it, I thought.
Yeah.
Very, very cute.
And I think it humanizes Archer more, and it really shows just how close that the time period of Enterprise is to us, right? You still have people with dogs and pets, and you don't really see that in the other Star Trek series. It's almost like they're so far in the future. You don't really. I mean, I know Janeway has the dogs, right? That with her fiance when she leaves, but you don't see them around the ship the way you do with Porthos. And Porthos is kind of a member of the crew in a way.
Yeah. You make an excellent point. It humanizes Archer and makes us feel more connected to them. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can connect myself to Archer because
Yeah.
we have dogs. Yeah, of
Exactly.
course. Yeah.
Same. Yep. Yeah,
Nice.
and we have some very notable aliens and new
Mhm.
species that appear in this show. Obviously, Tellarites and Andorians. We know prior to Enterprise that the Tellarites and Andorians are founding members of the Federation. Since the Federation is not together yet, we see a significant amount of Tellarite and Andorian animosity towards each other.
Yeah.
Right? They do not get along, and you're like, how in the heck are these species going to be founding members? Well, as the show goes on, we talked about before, right? Archer's not much of a diplomat, but at the end of the day, as the show goes on, he becomes better and better the more he does it, right?
Yeah.
Practicing being a diplomat, and eventually helps bring them together and helps found the Federation. But also we get the Enar for the first time, which is that subspecies of Andorian. They almost look, well, the Hemmer, right? They look
Yeah.
like this guy up here.
Yep.
Right? They look like him. White skin, they're blind, they live in the hills, they have a significant amount of telepathic abilities. So really cool, like way to kind of change things up, because we've seen Andorians and Tellarites in TOS before.
Yep. Yep. We have.
So I think this was cool. They brought that in. Obviously, a new species, the Xindi, and there are, if you remember from that trivia game, there's 5.
Ah,
There's
that's
5.
five.
There's 5 living There's 5 living Xindi, but there's actually, I believe, 6 types of Xindi. One is extinct, right? And when the question was asked, how many, which Xindi which is not a Xindi, and I got it right, even though I was told I was wrong. Mark, no, he agreed with me, but yeah. So there were 6 type of Xindi.
Yeah.
There's only 5 living right now. So very interesting to how you have like reptilians and primates and, aquatic and all these different things that are all part of the same species. Really very interesting and unique species as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It was all those sentient beings like on that same planet.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. You have denobulans, right? We
Mhm.
learned that with Dr. Phlox, and they're a very interesting species as well. And the whole alien species exchange that he does to become the Doctor of Enterprise. We have the Suliban, right? We
Mhm.
talked about that with Silic. Really unique species. This isn't a new alien or species, but I kind of put it in here as a joke. The next 2 is jokes.
Yeah.
We have Soong's test tube babies.
Yep.
They're humans who have been genetically modified, and after the whole Khan and eugenics wars, that humans kind of frown upon that stuff.
Yep. Not supposed to do that. Yep.
Not supposed to do that, but Soong was doing it anyways. And then not a new species, not even a subspecies, but zombie Vulcans from the very popular Star Trek Enterprise episode with the zombie Vulcans on board the ship. So very
yeah.
Yeah.
That episode was a scary episode, and we recommend it. Like we said at Halloween, we recommend that episode.
Yeah, we did a Halloween special before, so be sure to go. Well, maybe we should probably do another one this year. That'd be kind of fun.
Yes.
Yeah, like
we
an
should do
updated
another
version,
one.
like a 2023 version, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some new Strange New Worlds episodes that have been in that would definitely go into the Halloween watch list, right?
Yeah, that would.
Yeah. So we'll have to maybe do an updated version of that. But yeah, I mean, definitely some interesting aliens, and there's several other alien species that we didn't list on here. These are ones that are more recurring, I think, but there are some ones that were introduced in the show we just didn't spend a lot of time on. And I'm sure if you're watching or listening, you go, "Oh, you guys didn't talk about these." Well, there's a lot because you're exploring new planets and new species for the first time. But you mentioned before, Chris, there are some really, really fascinating and wonderful story arcs and significant events that we get during the run of the show.
Yeah, the Temporal Cold War is such a neat story arc. I don't think that had ever been done, to my memory, in any of the other Star Trek Legacy shows. I mean, Voyager had a lot of time travel, some time travel episodes and war in there, but the Temporal Cold War was cool. And that had a lot of the interaction with the Suliban. And it was definitely throughout season 1. So that was good. You have to pay attention to those episodes to understand what's like happening in the Temporal Cold War, but a good one that they did. The Xindi War was really a good one that was like this set up this whole arc when the Xindi attack happened, and then it just set up like the whole arc for the series for them to go and find and essentially try and hunt down the Xindi and take them out.
Yeah.
The Mirror Universe one, I thought was really great. That episode, I think in
the Mirror Darkly Part 1 and 2. Yeah, that'll be a deep dive we'll do down the road too, as part of our mirror universe look.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if my memory serves, I'll have to rewatch that one, but the mirror universe version of Hoshi, like she was the kind of mastermind.
Yeah, she was the Empress. She was an Empress. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That was really cool. I remember at a convention one time, Linda Park talking about that story arc and how much she loved being able to do that and play that character, because it was so different, obviously, from her regular character of Hoshi.
Yeah, that was great. And we've got the Trip and T'Pol kind of a relationship build throughout the series, which was great to see. Yeah. And eventually they had a baby in season 4, but
things got interesting with that, and the whole idea of humans and Vulcans procreating, right? And that no one thought that it would be possible for a human and a Vulcan to have a baby. Obviously, we know that's true because Spock, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, but at that point they didn't know that. So Yeah, a lot of interesting storylines. One thing I found too, Enterprise kind of takes a page out of a few of the previous series books, right? So the idea of continual story arcs and watching episodes where you had to go back and watch previous ones, it harkens back to DS9 and what they did with the Dominion War and stuff. And then you've got the traditional standalone episodes like you're used to, right? From shows like Voyager and TNG and even some DS9s and TOS. So it's a kind of a combo, and we get that. We've seen that with Strange New Worlds this season as well, right? This kind of combo of continual story arcs while also having this new adventure every week type of thing.
Yeah. So they've learned from the past series that they've done, created this, kept improving like the formula, bringing it into Enterprise. And I thought it was cool. So you've got those, definitely those standalone episodes, like you said, but like when you think about the Xindi War, that almost felt like to me, like to make an analogy, like the Dominion War, the Xindi War, that, that was a good chunk of the series, going through the Xindi War, figuring out who the Xindi were, and trying to resolve that scenario. Yeah, and like true. great action pieces too, right? I think that was where I think related to that Xindi War circumstance, Archer was thrown back in time. They're somehow thrown back in time. Maybe.
No, I thought he was thrown ahead in time. Like into the future.
Okay.
I want to say, I can't off the top of my head, I can't remember, but yeah, he gets thrown through time with Daniels.
Yeah.
I
remember this one of the season finales. You had this great shot of this Archer running and this explosion in the background, and then I think it ending right there. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're looking at the first two seasons of Enterprise here on our part 1 of 2. Look at the show, and let's talk about some of our favorite episodes. I just kind of put all mine together in one. I didn't parse them out by seasons, but I'm interested on your take on this, Chris, because we've talked about the other 4 legacy shows so far, right? With TOS, Enterprise, TNG, DS9, and Voyager. Of the legacy series, I think it's quite possible. It's hard for me to say this, but I think it's quite possible that Broken Bow could be the best pilot episode of any of them in the franchise.
Yeah, I think Broken Bow is such a strong pilot episode.
Yeah.
We start off with the Klingons in it, right? So the Klingons come and there's a hunt down of the Klingons there. But part of the strength, I think, and the reason I like it is you get from that pilot episode, you get the premise of the entire series, right? Hey, humanity wants to start exploring. Here's our chance. Please, Vulcans, please don't hold us back. We want to go. We want to expand our horizons. Part of it for me is that it's able to set up that premise so effectively, because it gives you once you have that, this pilot lets you know what this show is all about. That's what makes it such a strong pilot,
Yeah.
When you think about, some of the other pilots, Voyager in a way does it the same way, because they're flung into the Delta Quadrant, and then you're like, oh, okay, they got to make their way back. But
yeah, Caretaker was a good pilot, I thought too.
Yeah. But the others like TNG, Encounter at Farpoint, well, yeah, it was a good pilot, and it introduces Q. But Broken Bow, very, very strong, very, very strong pilot, I felt, and effective. And having the Klingons in it, making this continuity of a species that we're familiar with from the other series kind of being in here, and humans aren't familiar with the Klingons yet, but this kind of introduces them, and then it goes forward like that. That was pretty much, I think, a great idea and a brilliant idea for the pilot for us.
Yeah, and we've talked about this where with Star Trek series, how they bring in stuff that's familiar to kick off a new show, right? Like with Encounter at Farpoint was the pilot episode where they had an old Dr. McCoy in it. Was he in the pilot episode? I don't remember if he was or
It's
not.
possible he was in the season 1. He was somewhere in season 1.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was in the pilot episode or not. But they did it with DS9 where they had Picard and the Enterprise, show up. They did with Voyager where they had the station in DS9. That was their launching point into the Badlands to go chase down the Maquis before they get, flung into the Delta Quadrant by the Caretaker. With Enterprise, because it's a prequel, you don't have that stuff.
Right.
But they bring in a familiar face in the Klingons. I mean, think about it. Is there any species in Star Trek that's more well known than the Klingons? I would argue no. The Klingons are the most well-known species from Star Trek, other than maybe Vulcans.
Other than the Vulcans.
Yeah. And even then, I think a lot of times people will reference Klingons before they reference Vulcans. At least a lot of people I know who are not Star Trek fans will reference Klingons before they reference Vulcans.
Well, and the Klingons have their own language.
Yeah.
I'm not aware that does Vulcan have its own language?
Vulcans do. Yeah, they do.
Okay.
I don't know if it's an official language, but they do have their own language and writing and stuff. But yeah. So I was curious about that, Chris, because I am someone who believes that Broken Bow might be the best pilot of the 5 legacy shows.
Nice.
I think I for me personally, if I rank them, that would be probably number 1. Honestly, I think it's really good. Like you said, I think you made a good point. It sets up the show.
Yeah,
it does a good job of saying, hey, this is where we're at. This is where they want to go, and we're going to bring in a familiar face, and you're going to see something. There will be some action, and you're seeing all these different characters being recruited to the ship, and it's not always that way. So I think this show does a wonderful job of setting up Enterprise as a series going forward.
Yeah, a lot of forethought there. I'm not sure on TNG with the pilot if there was as much forethought. I mean, I know they brought in Q in the pilot. I know Q was instrumental in the end too. But what I don't know yet is if that was the thought at the beginning, where Q would be this instrumental piece and also come back at the end, or not. So
yeah. I think it was very intentional stuff they did. I love they bring back James Cromwell to reprise his role as Zefram Cochrane and giving this little speech.
Yeah.
They just did such a good job. I think did such a good job of setting the foundation for the show moving forward. So definitely agreed. I had to list that as one of my favorite episodes, is the pilot.
Yeah.
You have the Andorian incident, which is at the Vulcan monastery, right? Where they discovered that the monastery is being secretly used as a listening post to spy on the Andorians. And they're the ones that accuse the Vulcans of it. And they're like, oh, we don't do that. And then they find out that they do. And then Enterprise's crew exposes the Vulcans, and then I remember Shran saying something to the effect of like, "Oh, I owe you one, Pink Scanner. I'm in your debt," or something like that. And then that comes back later in the series where that is, Shran honors that debt to Archer, and that's Enterprise. While it has its standalone episodes, has a lot of that continuity, which I just think is wonderful. I really do, to be able to tie stuff back to it in a way that just makes a show so good.
And this episode, the Andorian incident, is like important to me as well, because it's like you've got Archer and the Enterprise and humanity, because Archer is representing humanity, right? They're essentially exposing the duplicity of this Vulcan outpost, because Vulcans have been condescending, they've been smug, they say, hey, like, no,
that's the word I was looking for earlier. Condescending.
Yeah.
They're very condescending to humans, Andorians, everybody.
Yeah. And, Archer and that crew, the Enterprises, Archer recognizes like, hey, man, this is wrong. You guys shouldn't be doing this, because, now Andorians and Vulcans and humans, they're all together, right? In the era of TNG, they're all allies, but now in this era of Enterprise, there's antagonism for sure between the Vulcans and the Andorians, and you've got the Andorians as very they're intelligent but also very emotional too, right? And so I like how it's humanity that kind of calls it out, that says, hey hey man, this is wrong, right
Yeah, they're
and
like an
wrong.
objective
Yeah.
third party between the two sides, right?
Yeah. So that was super.
Yeah, and we see the warring that goes on between the Vulcans and Andorians, and the warring that has gone on between them in this series,
Hmm.
which I think is cool. But they just do such a good job of tying things together. And I'm curious in your thoughts on this too, Chris. Would you agree or disagree that this era in Star Trek is where, at least for me, Vulcans are maybe the most smug, condescending at any point in the franchise,
I agree completely. So
and not
this,
just to humans, to everybody.
yeah, to everybody. So this episode I felt was where T'Pol kind of it opened her eyes a little bit, right? I don't think she was aware that there was a hidden Vulcan outpost there,
No, no,
right? And then
yeah,
this kind of opens her eyes, like, oh, um, you know, not as they were Vulcans were not living up as much to their word as she thought.
yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah, man, absolutely. So they get a good dose of humility there for the Vulcans.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important. I think it's an important step in trying to build the trust and everything in the
Hmm.
show, amongst those races, right? To eventually get to the point where they become allies.
Yeah,
They have to. I think it's showing that what they had to go through to get to where they become in TNG and TOS.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So another episode for me I put down was Cold Front, right? That's the first time that Archer really is exposed to this temporal Cold War arc, right? And meets
Hmm.
Daniels and everything. Um, interesting fact about that episode, it was directed by Robert Duncan McNeil, aka Tom Paris from Voyager. So one of his directing.
Oh, I didn't know that at all.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that was neat. He's a fantastic director. So him and Jonathan Frakes are, I think, two of the best former Star Trek actors, directors that you see directing a lot of things. So it's a good episode and very well done. Shuttle Pod 1,
Hmm.
which is where Shuttle Pod Show kind of gets its namesake, right? That we support and we love those guys and gals. And that's where it was supposed to be an episode that was meant. There's a term for it that Dominic and Connor uses. It's basically meant to save money, right? Because they're running out of money and they need to save money for the rest of the season. So they do this episode where there's not a lot of CGI, there's not a lot of special effects, there's not a lot of X, Y, and Z, and it's just mostly Dominic and Connor in the shuttle pod, and it starts to get cold, and they're trying to save life, and they don't think the Enterprise is gonna find them and everything, and they think the ship's been destroyed, and they're trying to survive and not die in this shuttle pod alone. So very good episode, very touching episode as well.
Can, can we talk about that episode a little bit?
Yeah,
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 actually, yeah. Because you and I, we got to see the live performance,
yeah. The
right?
live reading. That's right. Yep.
Yeah, at the Shuttle Pod show, and it was incredible seeing that live reading, um, with both, uh, with both Dominic, um, and Connor doing it. It was just incredible. You know what? This episode, you're you're right. They were saving money by doing it, but the way that this episode went to the core of who Malcolm was and who Trip was, right? So
Yeah.
because they're facing what they think is the destruction of the Enterprise, and they're facing kind of their what they think is going to be their demise, and they're just they're on different kind of ends of thought, and throughout the episode, they're both expressing their ends of thought. You learn so much about them, but then they come together in this great and this beautiful friendship as they're trying to survive it. Um, and then both kind of willing to sacrifice themselves so that the other person can live. I thought was a beautiful thing. Definitely a turning point in their relationship for the rest of the show. And I just love it. This one is just pure, right? It strips everything back and it just goes to, hey, let's have an episode on exploring who these guys are as individuals and how they're
Yeah.
going to relate to each other. Yeah.
And I don't think that when they made this episode, the studio was expecting this episode to be a popular one, probably, but it has become a very endearing, popular episode, I think, amongst fans, for sure. And obviously, kind of getting the namesake for their show as well. So
Yeah.
the next episode I put down was Minefield. That's the one where they run into this Romulan minefield, and Archer and Malcolm Reed go outside and do a spacewalk on the ship, on the hull, to remove this mine the mine that's attached itself, and then it stabs Malcolm through the leg, and he wants to have the commander basically leave him, get away, jettison the piece of the hull with him on it, let it blow up, and he would sacrifice himself for the crew. Of course, that doesn't happen. They figure things out, but I thought this was a good episode too. This goes back to another really great episode by Dominic, and his performance as Malcolm Reed, and his wanting to sacrifice himself for the betterment of the crew and the people. So
it does, and that hits that. Malcolm Reed has such a history. I mean, we learned so much about him throughout the show with his. I think his father was in the Navy.
Yeah, he definitely has he has heritage with people in the Navy. Yep.
Yeah. And that just gives him, we learned so much about his history and his personality and his upbringing there. So
yeah,
that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one episode that I found very touching and very hard to watch, especially the very first time I watched it. And that is an episode called A Night in Sick Bay. And this is where Porthos goes down to this planet with the away team to kind of get out of the ship, right, and go get some sunlight and get, be able to run around and be a dog. And he comes back and he gets some kind of virus that affects his canine body, and he's on the brink of dying. And so Archer goes there and is with him in sick bay all night. And some of the funny moments, though, is Archer begins to learn some of the things that Phlox does at night, with all the animals he has in there that are used to help for healing and stuff. And it was some funny moments, but very touching when you see just how special Porthos is to Archer. And just, it's like so many of us, right? And the importance and the specialness of our dogs and our pets.
Yeah, absolutely. And humanizes it again. It makes us feel closer to Archer. Definitely makes me feel closer to Archer.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And the last couple ones really quick to kind of go through those. Future tense, we get the Tholians, which is awesome, fighting over a future ship that's discovered. That's a fun episode. Vanishing Point. I just watched Vanishing Point, Chris. Yesterday, or no, I think I watched. Friday. I watched it Friday, and this is where Hoshi transports her and Tripper down on the planet. They transport, and then she thinks hasn't been put back together properly, and she's experiencing all these issues. And then you find out that actually she was caught in the transporter buffer, and everything that happened to her, or she thought was happening to her, happened in 8 seconds, and it was all in her imagination, basically.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting episode. Definitely made you feel for it. But Vanishing Point is a moment where very early on in this series, and we've seen other moments too, where the transporter is not the preferred method of travel.
Oh yeah.
People don't trust it. Yes, it's been approved for biomatter, and it's Starfleet has said it's safe for humans to use, and it's been used a couple of times. Archer used it, I believe, might have been in the pilot episode, but they prefer to take shuttle pods, not the transporter, because people get creeped out by the idea. This was Hoshi's first time using the transporter herself, and she didn't want to use it again after that. I mean, if the transporter technology were in our world today, would you feel comfortable using it? Having all your molecules ripped apart and put back together?
No, we'd have so much skepticism on that. Like, well,
oh yeah. And imagine, in today's world, I don't think it could get made, because imagine all the red tape and all the hoops and all the things that would have to go through. I mean, they have started to create something similar to it, where they have been able to transport a single atom from like one spot to another in a room, but that's one atom. That's not a human being, where you have trillions of them running around, and they have to be put back in the right order. And it goes back to the idea of the movie The Prestige with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale. You remember that magician movie? And Hugh Jackman does this ultimate trick, and every time he does it, you learn a version of him. There's 2 versions created, and one version drops to the ground in this cylindrical tube full of water and dies, and the other one reappears in the back of the audience. And he says at one point in the movie, he's like, I never know which one I'm going to be, if I'm going to be the one appearing up back, or if I'm going to be the one that's in the water dead. And
Yeah.
it always made me think of the transporter in Star Trek. Like, people thought, like, well, if this happens and it rematerializes you, is it really you, or is it a copy of you, and the real you died? And every time you transport, it's a new person being made, and therefore the real version of you died the first time you used it. Real
Yeah.
kind of a head scratcher.
Yep.
So there's that one. First Flight, we talked about Archer's role in the NX program, and so that has flashbacks to his role early on in the testing of the NX ships. Unfortunately, there's some circumstances where his buddy, who was part of that program, has died, and he's trying to learn what happened and all this, that, and the other. So we get a good flashback into seeing a young Archer involved in the early development of a future Warp 5 ship. It's, the ships leading up to the Warp 5 ship. And then to finish out season 2, and the kind of where we're stopping on this, is the episode The Expanse, like you mentioned, not the show, the episode,
Yeah.
which is the season 2 finale, where the Xindi weapon appears at Earth and devastates Earth. In fact, I believe Trip's sister is killed in this attack on Earth, because it goes through Florida, where his sister lives and where he's from. But they don't know who the Xindi are yet. I don't believe the Xindi are introduced really until season 3. And so the Xindi, this unidentified alien weapon, shows up and, attacks Earth, and they don't know who it is, and they have to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
So really, really scary, because, Earth is has become more of a paradise. It might not be the paradise that it is in TNG, but it's certainly along that way, right? They reference it in DS9, where they said there hasn't been a murder on Earth in like 100 years. Well, in DS9, that put a murder sometime in like the mid 23rd century. So like 2260, 2270 something, I guess maybe later than that, but 100 years. So we know that there were still murders and things happening on Earth during the time of Enterprise. So it's not quite the paradise, but it's moving in that direction. And then you have this attack from this big weapon. So those are some episodes that stood out to me. There's plenty more I could have put, but these are some ones, especially from some of my recent watches, that were notable or memorable episodes. So what about you, Chris?
Yeah, a few that stuck out in my memory that I've got here. I put one down from these are all from season 1. And I had Terra Nova. And Terra Nova was a standalone episode, but they go to this planet and they realize, hey, there were some human explorers and colonists before. And like as the episode evolves, you realize, oh, what you think are aliens, they're not aliens, they're humans, and they had migrated underground for whatever reasons. I think maybe it was the environmental circumstances of the planet. But they've developed their own culture, their own kind of set of maybe sub beliefs.
And they're very primitive, right?
Very primitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked it because you go, kind of connects you to thinking, yeah, I could see something like this happening, right? Because these are colonists that have gone out. This is well before the NX-01 and the Enterprise, and they're just frontier explorers and colonists. And they
didn't really know what happened to them either, right? Yeah.
Right. They didn't know what happened. And so these are colonists that they can't go and get help from anywhere. So now I like that, kind of explores that idea, and they figure out what's happening. And there's plenty of suspense and through that episode. Another one that I liked a lot was called Rogue Planet. And they just encounter this rogue planet that is not in any star system. I believe it's just out there. And they visit the planet, and they also encounter another alien group there that likes to go to that planet to hunt like a particular being. Yeah. And we learned this is a special kind of unique alien being that can get into your mind, and it particularly gets into Archer's mind, and it takes the form of a beautiful lady. And you know why I liked it? So because at the end, so this alien being is trying to communicate to Archer to say, hey, help me. These people have always hunted us. We don't want them to hunt us. And yes, Archer does help. But what I love is the idea that this alien creature was able to get into Archer's mind and find this image, and it was only an image that Arthur could know. It wasn't actually a real person, but Archer got it from this poem. It was this Yeats poem that he had read, William Butler Yeats, and it was this image crafted from his imagination of reading that poem. And that was what the alien chose to go into his mind and represent herself as in communicating with Archer. And I thought, oh, that was really beautiful. And I think throughout the episode, Archer's thinking to himself, I recognize this woman, but I'm trying to figure out where I recognize her from. Right. And I think he realizes that at the end. So I thought a really beautiful idea that they thought of there.
Yeah.
And I think connecting it to Archer's imagination and connecting it to a poem that he read was excellent.
Yeah.
Another one that I really liked, and I don't remember the entire premise, but I remember what happened at the end. It was the season 1 finale on titled Shockwave, and I think this was a cliffhanger, but it connects to Archer always being under this intense pressure. Is humanity ready to be out here exploring? But in Shockwave, at the end, I believe there's something that Archer and Enterprise has to do, and what ends up happening, they either fire weapons or they make some sort of scan. The Enterprise does, but the planet is decimated, or the planet's atmosphere is decimated, and then all these people die.
Yeah.
And then you see the reaction on Archer's face, and then he's he's thinking, oh man, we just have to go home. He kind of destroyed the ability for humanity to be out here. They failed. I think they resolve it in the start of season 2, where was not Archer's mistake, but that one stood out to me, like going, oh wow, that was huge.
Yeah, the weight on his shoulders.
Yeah.
That was the episode, I believe, right, where Daniels takes Archer out of that situation to save him, and they go into it's like they go to like the 31st century, and they find, and it's on Earth, and Earth is left in ruins, but Daniels doesn't really know what happened. He's like, I don't know, this shouldn't be like this. Like, my office was not that far from here, kind of thing. And then the time portal's messed up, and how are we gonna we can't get home, and that's the cliffhanger, right? So this is where we got the temporal Cold War kind of introduction with Daniels earlier in season 1, and then the end of season 1, you're seeing Daniels come back, and you're seeing how closely interwoven that apparently Archer and his crew and Daniels and everybody is in this war that they didn't even know about.
Yep. So again, all of those are from season 1. I didn't talk too much about season 2, but those are the ones that stood out to me, and just in memory, just remembered them, like, oh yeah, these are the ones that I had.
Yeah, I've been watching, I think I mentioned this before on our podcast a while back, that I'd gone back and started watching Enterprise again. I hadn't watched it through in a long time, like over 10 years from beginning to end. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start this. And it was just like 6-7 months ago. I started just one episode here and there randomly. And I'm not even halfway through season 2, but I've been watching through it. And so there were some episodes from season 2 that I watched recently that I listed that were stood out to me. So nice. Yeah, well, this is our part 1 look at Star Trek Enterprise, or just Enterprise as it was known, for at least for the first 3 seasons. We are excited to continue talking about this. We think that this show, I know I do, this show is woefully underrated. I think there's so many good episodes. Yeah, I mean, there's some clunkers. Let's put it frankly, right? There's an episode, I believe it was in season 1, where Trip gets pregnant, and he has like the nipples appear on his arm from touching like the marble rocks or whatever with that alien, and he doesn't realize that's what happened, because the males in their species are the ones that get, have the babies. That was along the same lines as like the episode Threshold that everybody talks about from Voyager, where Paris and Janeway turn into lizards and they have babies, and just those types of episodes. Just a very bizarre one. But in that episode, we see an alien race who has basically what we would say is the beginnings of a holodeck.
Like a holodeck. Yeah.
They had never experienced that before. They don't have an Enterprise. They didn't know they could touch it, see it, smell it. Everything was crazy. So that was really cool. Like seeing like the some of the origins, or at least the ideas for things early on in this series that lead to stuff eventually in the other Trek shows, I think is really cool. Like you're seeing a lot of the origin stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. I was thinking for our next, when we do our part 2 on Enterprise, we'll have to touch on the theme song, and talk about how each of us feels on that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the
Yeah.
theme song is incredibly unique. Some people love it, some people hate it, and I don't think there's too many people in between. It's either you love it or hate it, right? So, but this show brings us a lot of new stuff. It brings us a period of time we don't have a lot of information about and fills in some of the gaps. And the first 2 seasons had some really great, had some clunker episodes, but in general had some really great episodes as well that we enjoyed. And we can't wait to talk about season 3 and 4 in our other part 2 of our look at Enterprise, because season 3 and 4 are really fantastic, especially season 4. So we want to reiterate, our condolences to when we heard about Manny Koto passing and his contributions to the show and being the showrunner, and how incredible season 4 was, because it was pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's unfortunate because, the Enterprise gets canceled in 2005. It gets only 4 seasons. It barely made 4 seasons. Apparently there was talks it was going to get canceled before that. And then they made 4 seasons. It gets canceled. And many people believe season 4 was really the jumping off point for Enterprise. And there was so much more they could have explored. They could have gone into the Romulan Earth Wars and all these things that they just didn't get a chance to do. And so it would be amazing if they ever did a legacy Trek series in the future that brought characters from Enterprise back, because that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, but anyways, thank you guys for tuning in and watching to us all over the interwebs and the globe. We do very much appreciate it. Or for listening, if you're listening to on your favorite podcast platform, again, be sure to go on to Facebook and Instagram, follow us there, check us out on YouTube if you're listening to us, and subscribe there as well for all of our video versions of our episodes. If you are watching us on YouTube, all of our episodes can be found on your favorite podcast platform, because we didn't initially start doing this recording with video. So be sure to go back and check out previous episodes we've done in the past, because there's many.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many we're up to now, but it's many episodes on your favorite podcast platform that you can listen to on your drive to work, while you're at the gym, whatever you prefer. But yeah, so we'll be back soon with our part 2 look at Enterprise. And until then, thank you. Take care. We'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt Podcast.